Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I'm president of the City Club's Board of Directors. The City Club's mission is to inform, educate, and inspire citizens by presenting significant ideas and providing opportunities for dialogue in a collegial setting. That mission has never been more important today, as we are regularly bombarded with information, some true, some half-true, and some untrue, from an ever-growing variety of sources. For that reason, I am especially pleased today to introduce our speaker, Bill Adair, Washington Bureau Chief for the St. Petersburg Times and editor of PolitiFact. Mr. Adair has worked in the nation's capital since 1997, and during that time has covered Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, and national politics. He has also covered aviation safety and is the author of The Mystery of Flight 427, Inside a Crash Investigation, which is an account of the National Transportation Safety Board's efforts to find the cause of a 1994 plane crash. A few words about the project for which Mr. Adair serves as editor. As stated at its website, PolitiFact's goal is, quote, to help find the truth in politics, end quote. In pursuit of that goal, reporters and researchers examine statements made by elected officials, candidates, talk show hosts, and others involved in the political process, research those statements, and then rate the accuracy of the statements as true, mostly true, half true, barely true, false, and last but not least, pants on fire. Similarly, reporters and researchers assess whether a candidate accused of flipping has in fact done so, and they assign a rating of no flip, half flip, or full flip. Or full flop, I'm sorry, not to be confused with confused with gymnastics terminology. PolitiFact operates currently in 8 states: Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Oregon, Rhode Island, Texas, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Since PolitiFact was established a few years ago, its national site and state partners have rated over 2,600 claims. And among its awards, PolitiFact in 2009 earned a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. Our speaker was recognized for excellence in journalism before becoming editor of PolitiFact. In 1998, Mr. Adair was the winner of the Everett McKinley Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress. And in 1999, he received a Society of Professional Journalists Award in the newspaper wire service Washington Correspondence category. And so I am very pleased to present on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, Bill Adair, Washington Bureau Chief for the St. Petersburg Times and editor of PolitiFact.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for that nice introduction. It's a real honor to be here. I know you all have had some really prestigious speakers, and I'm really honored to even sort of come in behind them and be up here today. It is also great to be back in Cleveland. I was here, as Paul mentioned, in the summer, and when we set up PolitiFact Ohio, which I hope you have all seen, in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. There is a great team at the Plain Dealer headed by Bob Higgs, who's right here, and Mark Namick, the political editor that is carrying on PolitiFact's work here in Ohio, and has really done, I think, an excellent job of holding your elected officials accountable, and that's what we're all about with PolitiFact. We have tried to reinvent American political journalism to do what I think we probably should have been doing all along, which is calling the balls and strikes in American politics. If you talk to a lot of political reporters who are now doing PolitiFact, they'll tell you, I think, how fulfilling it is that they've wanted to do this for so long, that they have heard politicians, and we also fact-check pundits and talk show hosts, they have heard them using lines along the way that they know are not true. I know I did that. And it's just very rewarding to be doing this. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My background, as Paul mentioned previously, I was an aviation reporter and became a political reporter because an odd thing happened in covering aviation safety. aviation got so safe that there wasn't a lot to write about. And I think I wisely decided that there would be a more fruitful career covering politics, where there was sure to be plenty to write about than in writing about plane crashes. And I think that's actually a testament to great work by the people I wrote about in my book at the NTSB and the FAA, who have made our aviation system so incredibly safe. So I, in about 2000, switched to being a full-time political reporter, covered the presidential campaign in 2000, and so I know Ohio actually from a bus, from being with the Gore campaign and traveling through the state. So I've seen a lot of Ohio over the years, and then in 2004 I covered the Bush-Cheney campaign, and spent a fair amount of time in your state. And along the way, I came to this situation where I would hear somebody say something, and I'd think, well, that's not true. And yet, as a journalist, because we're trying so hard not to side with one side or the other, we were trying to be neutral, I wouldn't do anything about it. And so I decided by 2007, when I started to look at what I would do in 2008, that I needed to become a referee and to call those balls and strikes and to really fact-check the way I think American journalists should have been fact-checking all along. And so that's how the idea for PolitiFact came about. Along the way, then, we decided to, in effect, franchise. I think once we developed the Truthometer, we realized that the Truthometer, which worked initially at the national level so well in the presidential campaign, that you could use it at the state level, fact-checking your members of Congress, your senators. You can use it at the local level, fact-checking your mayors and city council members, and you can use it on talk show hosts, on people like Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow and Glenn Beck. So we have an area on PolitiFact where we fact-check them, and you can go and you can see their record, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I'd like to start today by focusing on talking points. I assume you're probably all familiar with talking points. You know what they are. They're the short sound bites that we hear every day from our political leaders, and that they use to tell us where they stand on the issues. And you hear sound bites everywhere, on TV and radio, and newspapers and blogs, if you watch C-SPAN, on O'Reilly and Hannity, on Olbermann and Maddow. American politics is really now the battle of the talking point. The Democratic talking points, I'm sure you've heard them. They are that the Bush tax cuts favor the rich, that Republicans want to privatize Social Security, and that the new Republican majority in the House wants to take us back to the failed economic policies that drove our economy into a ditch. The Republican talking points are that Obamacare is a government takeover of health care, and that letting the tax cuts expire would result in a massive tax increase and harm small businesses. The talking point has become the ammunition in our political wars. They're so important that both parties have turned their think tanks and their PR operations into talking point factories. They churn out focus group tested talking points. I don't know if you ever watch Fox and you see Frank Luntz, who's one of the real masters of this, and he will give the Republicans advice on how to fine-tune their talking points so they have the biggest impact. Paul was mentioning one of the Democratic talking points about Wall Street banks, which became a villain in a lot of the things that Democrats talked about. The whole goal of the talking point is to basically score points against the enemy. The parties work hard for consistency. We know that when members of Congress leave town, leave Washington to come home, they're given lists of talking points. You can even get them on the party conference websites. And the idea is that they have the party-approved talking points so they can come home and hammer those points again and again. And before long, we actually believe that the Republicans want to privatize Social Security and that Obamacare is a government takeover. So This is what passes for political discourse in our modern age. The parties hurl talking points at each other, but rarely do they actually talk. There's some good from this. Talking points may not help our political discourse, but they feed our cable channels and the blogosphere. And PolitiFact. I guess you could say that, having the PolitiFact editor up here railing against talking points is like a cardiac surgeon, railing against butter. I've done well thanks to the talking point, but I'm going to speak today at a higher level. The talking point provides constant material for our polarized information sources that allow us to tune in to the views we want to hear and remind us why we dislike the people we dislike. Do you dislike Sarah Palin or John Boehner? Tune into MSNBC any night and you can hear the snarky attacks from Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow and their people who they bring on, who are in many ways just kind of yes men and yes women who like, yeah, Rachel, yeah, oh yeah, and the same way, if you dislike Obama or Nancy Pelosi, tune into Fox and it's the same thing. You'll hear the talking points over and over again in a steady stream of yes men and yes women who will reassure the Fox host that they're right. And if that's not enough for you, you can seek your information, your political information, from polarized news sources. On the left, you can go to Huffington Post and just read what you want to hear. Your side is right. You don't need to consider any other point of view. If you're conservative, you can turn to WorldNet Daily or Newsmax. No matter where you go, you'll be bombarded with the same talking points over and over and over again until you eventually believe them. Talking points, I think, dumb down the political discourse. There are only good guys and bad guys, black and white, and tons of cliches. And I don't think that's good for the political discourse. It might actually be good for my business, but I don't think that that is helping us solve the problems of our country. And it is also in the process putting an awful lot of falsehoods out there that become accepted as fact. And it is stunning if you look at some of the statistics. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the claim by some people that Barack Obama was not really born in Hawaii, that he was born in Kenya. And they have done recent polls on this that show an astounding percentage of people actually believe he was born in Kenya. I think one poll I saw said it was 27%. Now, what's remarkable to me, and we have fact-checked this many times and found the claims to be false or pants on fire, what's astounding to me about this, for this to be true, is that it would have had to be a conspiracy that was pretty far-sighted, that even involved the two Honolulu newspapers, which in August 1961, when Obama was born, printed his birth announcement as being born in Honolulu newspapers. So that's pretty persuasive to me, and actually that's actually more persuasive than any official document we might get from the official records in Hawaii. I think the fact that his birth certificate was in there pretty much seals the deal for me. And yet people consistently believe that. And I think that speaks to a couple of things. I think it speaks to our polarized society where there are good guys and villains, and I would bet that that same 27%, if you were to do cross-tabulations on it, that same 27% were people who don't like President Obama from a political standpoint. But I think it also speaks to the talking point, to the nature of these falsehoods getting repeated over and over and over again. How many times during the campaign did we hear that Obamacare was a government takeover of health care? Over and over and over again. On PolitiFact, either PolitiFact National or our 8 state sites check claims like that at least 4 or 5 times and publish them. But we heard it many, many more. And let me tell you, you don't necessarily have to be a fan of the Democratic healthcare reform law to know that it is anything but a government takeover of healthcare. What it is using the free market to try to provide health insurance for people who are not currently getting it. You will continue to get your health care from private health insurance. And what's amazing is how, though, that became accepted as with people saying, yeah, government takeover. Well, why? Because it's a talking point, and it just got repeated and repeated. And I'll tell you, from when I wrote a book of what the advice is to our members of Congress, when I wrote my book about the plane crash, a PR guy for Boeing, who I had worked with in arranging interviews for the book, said, if you don't mind, let me give you some advice for when you promote the book. Decide what your talking points are and just repeat them. And so if you're on a radio talk show and somebody asks you something, don't answer the question, and it'll be hard because you're a journalist and you're going to want to answer the question. Don't answer it. Just score one of your talking points. Now think about the last time you saw somebody interviewed. I saw this, I was watching Fox or MSNBC last night, and I saw just a classic example of this where somebody was, I can't remember who it was, where somebody was asked something and they just didn't. I know, it was Ray LaHood, the Secretary of Transportation, was on, he was actually on Morning Joe yesterday, and he was asked something that was an interesting question. The question, he was talking about distracted driving, and he was asked, what about if it's not about texting, what about somebody driving along having a conversation with the person sitting in the passenger seat? And Ray LaHood did not address that question at all. He just repeated his talking point about BlackBerries. And it was, to me, just a small example of how the talking point is really harming political discourse. Now, texting while driving, obviously a very serious issue, and there has been legislation to deal with it in many states, and it's definitely something we need to talk about. But he didn't answer the question, and because of this culture of the talking point. PolitiFact and here in Ohio, PolitiFact Ohio, is our answer to the talking point. We run websites, as Paul said, for people who want to know what's true and what's not. We take those talking points and we research and find the truth. We then rate their accuracy on our truthometer, from true to false to our lowest rating, pants on fire. We have created a new form of journalism. It is not just that we publish a fact-checking article about this, but the way that we present it on the web allows you to look at things in ways that would never have been possible with the traditional way that journalists fact-check. So I'm sure in the past you're familiar with the ad watches, where a newspaper or a TV station would fact-check a campaign ad, and it would appear, if it was in a newspaper, in the Metro section on page 6. But if you missed it, you were out of luck, because unless you stored up all your papers, and then when you saw that ad for Sherrod Brown or John Kasich, and you're like, gee, I wonder if that ad is right, and you go back, and wasn't that on page 6 on Tuesday? You know, the beauty of PolitiFact Ohio is you can go to it any time. You can look up Sherrod Brown, you can look up John Kasich, and you can see what we have fact-checked that they have done. And you can browse by issue. You want to see all the statements about taxes in Ohio, you can do that. If you want to see what is John Kasich's record, you can go to his person page on PolitiFact in Ohio and see they've rated him 13 times, and of those times he's gotten so many trues and so many falses. Our goal is to satisfy your curiosity. We try to put ourselves in your shoes. You're watching a campaign ad, you're hearing a speech, you're hearing the talking point, and you wonder, is that true? We want to answer that question for you. we checked, during the campaign, we checked the Democratic claims that Republicans want to privatize Social Security. I know you heard that a lot here in Ohio. We rated those barely true or false, because the reality was that the Republicans were very careful what they said about the future of Social Security. In many cases, they didn't offer much detail about their plans, but it definitely was not accurate for the Democrats to say that. Likewise, when Republicans said that Obamacare is a government takeover of health care, we rated that false or pants on fire. In a chaotic information age, I think we have found a new niche for the news media to help you find the truth. That's important because now you, probably like me, get your news from many different sources. I hope you read the Plain Dealer every morning, but you probably also rely on other sources. You may go to different news websites depending on your interest. If you're interested in sports news, you may go to ESPN. If you're interested in political news, you may go to Huffington Post or to Newsmax. You have more news sources now than ever, but probably more than ever, you need to know what of it is true and what's not. I thought about this recently when I got an email from the superintendent of education in the county where I live, Arlington, Virginia. And the superintendent had emailed all the parents about his proposed budget for next year and where he was going to make cuts and how he was going to make up a budget shortfall. Now, this is the kind of thing that in the past my local newspaper would have told me. My local newspaper would have said, here's the superintendent's plan, and here are the challenges that he's facing, and here's what the school board says, and these are some of the other things that he could do. And my local newspaper would give me his message in context. But he doesn't need to go through the local newspaper anymore because he has the email address of every parent. So he can come directly to us, unfiltered as parents, and give us his spin, his talking points, without anyone in the news media saying, well, he said this, but that's not really true. And what's happened because of the consolidation and the challenges that the news media has faced, my local newspaper, the Washington Post, doesn't cover education in Arlington County much at all anymore. So there isn't anyone there to say, well, wait, that's not true. So his message is coming out unfiltered. And as I read his email, my thought was, is that true? It would have been perfect for PolitiFact. So steadily, PolitiFact is growing and answering that question for people throughout the country. PolitiFact National, our main website, has published more than 1,700 Truthometer items since we launched. Our state sites here in Ohio and 7 other states have published 965 more. Collectively, we have created the most extensive fact-checking operation in the history of journalism. We plan to expand to other states in the coming year and possibly broaden our scope beyond politics into other areas. We also have a feature where we track campaign promises. We have a feature on our website called the Obameter, where we took Barack Obama's campaign promises and we went through after the election and tried to figure out how many promises he had made and catalog them all. We sort of figured we'd have about 200 campaign promises. There were 508. So we created a lot of work for ourselves. There's some days when I wish that John McCain had won because he promised a lot less. What we do with our Obameter is the same thing that we do with the Truthometer. We do solid, independent, neutral journalism and then use a meter to help you see what your elected officials are saying and doing. So we hold President Obama accountable for his words by rating his promises on our Obameter from in the works, stalled, promise kept, promise broken, and compromise. And so you can go to our website and go to our Obameter page, and you can see how he's done on each of those 508 promises. Let me conclude by saying that the paradox of our information age is that people have more information sources than ever before. The ability to know anything with just a few clicks. And yet, many of us are seeking our information in an echo chamber where we hear only the talking points we want to hear. PolitiFact is the antidote for the talking point. If you want to know, is that true? We'll give you the answer. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring Bill Adair, Washington Bureau Chief for the St. Petersburg Times and editor of PolitiFact. We will return to our speaker in a minute for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to start formulating your questions now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We also remind you that members and guests alike are welcome to the City Club and hope that everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. Please visit our website, www.cityclub.org, to see a full schedule of our upcoming programs. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. We are pleased to welcome guests at a table hosted today by University Circle Incorporated. Thank you for joining us today. We are also pleased to host students at our forum today who are here as part of our City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous contribution from the Fred E. Scholl Foundation. With us today are students from Cuyahoga Community College Upward Bound and Max Hayes High School. Will the students please stand to be recognized? Thank you very much for joining us today. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Development Director Cheryl Heldon and Program Director Kerry Miller. First question, please.
Mr. Adair, thank you for addressing us on this important question of how we keep political truth available to us all. I noted you got an award from in honor of Everett Dirksen for distinguished coverage of Congress, and I'm old enough to remember Everett Dirksen and when I was a youngster and lived in Maryland. And I believe the political discourse then was a lot more civil and engaging, and wondered if you thought with the current media there was any chance of ever getting back to that kind of civic engagement where you really do discuss issues in a political setting on what the facts are and what the real outcomes would be.
Great question. I am an optimist by nature, and so I am hopeful. And I do think with the right leaders, you can, I think we could get back to that. There are, though, some big institutional challenges that I think make it difficult. First is the information age that I talked about, that I just think that if you look at many of the new members of Congress who got elected, they don't come from the political middle. They come very much from their party's bases. And they do that, they appeal to the base by going to information outlets that support their ideas and repeating their talking points. What I didn't hear at all during the campaign was anybody saying, I think it's really important to get into office and be pragmatic and work out a compromise. Did you hear that at all? I didn't. It seems like compromise, which I think is the natural outcome of that kind of discussion, has become a sign of weakness. We fact-checked some claims in Georgia and Texas that our partners did, and where one candidate would be criticizing their primary opponent for having the gall, these both happen to involve Republicans that I recall, for having the gall to work with the Democrats on a bill. Oh my gosh, isn't that awful? And so, so that's what's happened now. So I'm hopeful, and I think it really has to come from the leadership. But everybody has to be willing to give something. What we haven't seen is any sort of willingness. I mean, even from the Democratic side, after the commission on the deficit commission came out with its report last week, it took about 7 seconds until Nancy Pelosi put out a statement saying, "This is unacceptable." Well, we're not going to solve the deficit with that sort of kind of, immediate response to a pretty thoughtful proposal. Now, it wasn't very detailed, and, I'm sure there's stuff in there that I know there's stuff in there Democrats don't like. I know there's stuff in there that Republicans don't like. The Republicans were actually a little more reserved about it, and that signaled to me that they might be willing to work out something. But for Nancy Pelosi to basically say, "No way," it's like, oh man. That's not going to solve the issues of the deficit. So I'm hopeful.
Last night, John Roberts of the 10 o'clock news and CNN had the question about the president's trip to India costing $200 million and took 2,000 people with him. The woman who said that, is it possible she believes what she said? David Gergen didn't come out against it. And John Roberts made her look appropriate.
Great question, and I know a lot of details about that one. So what he's referring to is a comment made on November 4th by Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who is a Republican from the Minneapolis suburbs. And she was on Anderson Cooper's show on November 4th, and she said that Obama's then upcoming trip to India was going to cost $200 million a day and have this entourage of 2,000 people, and portraying it as a trip of excess and luxury and big government. So Anderson Cooper, to his credit, that night said, "That can't be true," and he challenged her on it, and she said, "I read it in the media." Which I always find a little funny from people who spend a lot of their time criticizing the media. But that's what she said, and that's how it went out. So the next day, we jumped on that, and we got asked by readers, "Hey, will you fact check this?" So we fact checked it and found that the media, in this case, and what's amazing in our internet age is that things can spread like wildfire. So something started with one anonymous quote in a newspaper in India. And that, and basically how, and you have to sort of question, one, it's anonymous, so it's questionable to begin with there. And also, it is, how is an unnamed official in India able to make cost estimates about a trip by a U.S. president? But doesn't matter, because in the internet age, it just spreads like wildfire, and it's everywhere, and bloggers are jumping on it, and Michelle Bachmann is saying it. So we fact-checked it that day and gave it a pants on fire. And we talked to many different people to fact-check this. We talked to the White House. We talked to journalists who have traveled with the White House and know what a White House entourage is like and could help estimate costs. We talked to former presidential advance people, and we just totally debunked it. But of course, it continued to spread. And the media, at some point, and I don't know the time, but on Fox.com, they repeated it as if it was fact. So it is just amazing how those things spread. Now, let me just end the answer by pointing out Michelle Bachmann's record on PolitiFact. She is a somebody we look at a lot because she says a lot of provocative things. And as I explained, if you go to anybody's page, you can see what their record is. So, you go to John Boehner's page, you can see how many times we fact-checked John Boehner and how he's done. And Bob wrote a story the other day assessing John Boehner's record, and it said, more often than not, John Boehner speaks the truth. That sort of more half-true, mostly true truths than falses and pants on fires. I'm not sure he doesn't even have any pants on fires, right? So, so that gives you a sense, sort of a member of the Republican leadership, decent record. Michelle Bachmann, we have fact-checked on PolitiFact National 13 times, and she has 6 pants on fire ratings and 7 false ratings. So I was joking with a member of the Republican leadership the other day. Michelle Bachmann was actually thinking of running, or she was considering running for the Republican leadership, and I said, do you think it would be inappropriate if PolitiFact were to endorse Michelle Bachmann? Anyway, next question.
Thank you for being here today. I was wondering, do you see people such as Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert as your competition, or another aspect of political coverage to be fact-checked?
Well, I first should acknowledge that I had also the great honor this year of being on the Colbert Report, which was a lot of fun, and they are a really interesting, they play a really interesting role in American politics. They are, I think, largely comedians, and I think that is the case, particularly in the case of Colbert. I think Stephen Colbert is just a brilliant comedian. And if you look at the segment he did on PolitiFact, I mean, I just think it is just, I mean, separate from the fact that it was about us and it was wonderful publicity for us, it was brilliant comedy and brilliant political commentary. And Jon Stewart also, I think, is, I mean, they are the two great political humorists of our time now, I think. Where I think they're a little bit different is that if you look at Jon Stewart's speech at the rally to restore sanity, the difference was Stephen Colbert was an actor playing Stephen Colbert, and Jon Stewart there was a lot of fun and shtick, and but then Jon Stewart gave a very serious speech about the need for everyone to calm down. And I think what's different with Jon Stewart is I think he steps out of the role of comedian and becomes a commentator. And this, particularly with regard to Fox News, I don't know if you watched the show last night. Last night he did a riff on Glenn Beck, and his criticism of Fox is just very pointed and hilarious. But you can see a little bit of anger coming out there, and I think that came out in his speech. We've actually fact-checked Jon Stewart once when he made a very serious factual claim. He did an interview with Bill O'Reilly, and he said that 1/3 of the stimulus was on tax cuts. And so we fact-checked that, and we found that he was right. And I think as part of the shtick, when I did Colbert's show, we did a fact check of Colbert, but we have not treated him, other than that appearance, we haven't really treated him as a serious figure. But they are, I mean, I just think it is very entertaining, but I think they're pretty much comedians.
Do you think that the internet has an effect on the quality of journalism?
Do I think the internet has well, I think the internet is a vehicle for journalism that gives us a way to put journalism out there, and some of that journalism, some of that journalism is very good, and some of that journalism is terrible, and that's sort of a classic case where you can't get mad at a printing press. It's whoever's writing the stuff that's going on the printing press. I think that the challenge of journalism in the internet age is that now everybody has a printing press. And for those of us who work for legacy media companies, suddenly my competitor, so to speak, is anybody with a blog. And in a way, it's sort of back to what I sound like Glenn Beck, sort of back to what our founding fathers envisioned, in terms of freedom of speech meant anybody could post a flyer on a tree that anybody could read. And in that sense, I think the internet is wonderful in allowing people to speak. But it also allows anyone to speak. And I think that the downside of that is a lot of falsehoods get out there, and it is a great way to pass falsehoods very quickly, as we saw with the $200 million a day thing in India.
My children call me a news junkie, and while I was doubtful at first, I have come to depend on PolitiFact. I read the Plain Dealer and the Sunday New York Times and the Sun papers and occasionally the Call-in Post. But how do I know I'm getting news? How much fact-checking is there done in general in journalism today?
Well, that depends how you define fact-checking. If you read a story that Mark writes about a local political figure or your governor, you can be sure that Mark has gone through and checked his facts to make sure it's right. And what's fascinating, I just got fact-checked for an article that is being written about PolitiFact in American Journalism Review. And magazines still have fact-checkers who will call the sources who are being quoted in the magazine article and say, okay, here's what the reporter quoted you as saying, is that correct? And that's very helpful. Did you really go to Arizona State University? I got a similar inquiry. I was interviewed for a book that an Italian journalist is writing, and I had done the interview in New York City. And he sent me an email, and he's like, I just need to check a few facts. Now, we met for breakfast at Shippers, and you had a Western omelet. Is that right? That's fact-checking. But to the broader question, how much fact-checking is going on, I think we are part of a very positive trend in journalism that I think there is more fact-checking. So let me pay credit to our inspiration, factcheck.org. Factcheck.org is run by a journalist named Brooks Jackson, founded by Brooks and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania named Kathleen Hall Jameson. And they are really the parents of modern fact-checking. It was established in 2003, and it's run by the Annenberg School at the University of Pennsylvania. And they sort of started what I consider sort of modern fact-checking, or at least this wave of fact-checking. What we did with PolitiFact is we sort of went pop. We took their approach and said, well, that's really good, but let's see if we can liven it up a little bit with the truth-o-meter, and let's see if we can really take advantage of the power of the internet. Traditional journalism, you would just post long stories that, let's face it, are we going to read those? But if you put a truth-o-meter to it and you use the internet to pull the things together so you can see how many truths and half-truths somebody says, then it's a little more accessible to readers. So that we came along and did that. So as a result of us and FactCheck, there is more fact-checking now than ever. We sparked not just the 8 partner sites like the Plain Dealer's PolitiFact Ohio, but fact-checking websites in San Diego, Seattle, Denver, Phoenix, Minneapolis, Dallas. So I think it's accurate to say there was more fact-checking in the 2010 campaign than ever in the history of journalism. And if you wanted to know the truth about that ad that said that your congressman wanted to privatize Social Security, you could find out the truth. You might have had to go on the internet and look it up, but the truth was there. So, and I think this trend is, judging from how many phone calls I get from other news organizations that want to start PolitiFact, I think this trend is growing, and I think we're in the right place. Both as a business, I think this will help both the Plain Dealer and the St. Petersburg Times in adapting to this modern world. But I also think from the standpoint of empowering democracy, I think we're doing very well.
I want to thank you first and foremost for this important service that you're in the work that you're doing, and I want to thank the Plain Dealer for partnering with you in this work. I just want to know, can you provide any specific examples of where your PolitiFact has perhaps affected outcomes of races, or do you have any way of measuring the results of your reporting?
Well, I should say that my goal is not to change the outcome of a race, and in fact my goal is to empower democracy. I'm not trying to get Barack Obama to stop exaggerating. I'm not trying to get John Boehner to stop exaggerating. My goal is to give you the information that you need so you can make judgments about your political leaders and to hold our political leaders accountable. So, so my goal isn't to change things, but I can cite some examples where our work has been acknowledged and changed things that people have said, including the president. So there was a stock line that President Obama used when he was selling his health care plan where he would say, under my program, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep your health insurance plan. And we rated that half true because the reality was that the Democratic plan was actually going to cause such disruptions in the marketplace that it's entirely possible that the private health insurance that you have now might not be available to you in a year. That they may say, we don't want to deal with these restrictions on pre-existing conditions or whatever. And so we rated Obama's statement half true. A few days later, he gave a speech to Congress about his health care plan, and he changed how he said that line. What had been a stock line every time he spoke about it. And he said, there is nothing in my plan that would require you to have a different health insurance company. True. So we did another truth-o-meter item, and we rated that true. Likewise, we gave Obama a false. He had a stock line in the 2008 campaign where he would say, gasoline prices have never been higher. And we gave him a false. Actually, gasoline, when you control for inflation, gasoline prices have actually been higher in 1981. So the day after we did that, when he came to that point in his speech, when he always used that line, he said, I think he changed it to, gasoline prices are the highest in memory. Another example, Rand Paul, the new senator from Kentucky, made a statement very similar to the one that PolitiFact Ohio had today in the Metro section, where John Boehner said federal employees make twice as much as people in the private sector. And we rated it false when Rand Paul said it, because it's an apples to oranges comparison, and it uses, it's a make, they're actually including benefits. So the next time Rand Paul said that line, he got it right. And so, so sort of little by little, you do see the impact. But I'm not sure that's enough to overcome the culture of the talking point. You know, if they're told attack on, you know, my opponent wants to privatize Social Security or my opponent wants to cut Medicare, you know, I'm sure there's probably a political consultant somewhere saying, you know, who cares what PolitiFact says? We'll just take the hit, you know. Just keep repeating the talking point.
Mr. Adair, the check finding which you do is certainly outstanding and performs a wonderful service. But my question relates to the scope of the audience which you were able to reach as compared to the scope of the audience where frequently the misstatement appears. And I'm thinking of the millions of listeners who listen to talk show hosts, whether it be Rush Limbaugh or people of that type, or Fox News, which has millions of people who view their programs. And to what extent do you think there's a possibility of building up a truth network which will rival in size those which carry the misstatements?
I love that idea, and we are on our way to doing that. We've had conversations with television networks about trying to partner with them and let them use the Truthometer to reach much broader audiences. And by having partners like the Plain Dealer in 8 states, I hope someday in 50 states, I hope we can have that sort of exposure. The challenge is hearing the talk show hosts say these things is like eating ice cream. It's like it's easy, it tastes so good, and so well, let me go to a fact-checking site and see if Rush is right. Well, that's kind of like eating your vegetables, So our challenge is spreading our work widely, but also presenting it in a way that it doesn't taste like vegetables. But I'm with you, and I got an interesting email the other day from a gentleman who said you really need a PolitiFact TV show, and I'm not sure we have enough to sustain a 30-minute show every day or even once a week, but I think it could become, just as it's a fixture on the Metro page of the Plain Dealer, I think it could be a solid 1-minute, 2-minute segment on the nightly news every night. So I hope we can achieve that.
Bill, I too would like to thank you for the work. In this most recent campaign, we received a lot of information about why we should vote against candidates, very little about why we should vote for them. So PolitiFact Ohio really was one of the few sources to get some information to inform why we should vote for or against a candidate. But in this most recent campaign, we saw talking points that were mean-spirited, snarly, and very, very personal. We also saw, I think, the first real impact of these political action groups that were incredibly well-funded, that authored many of those nasty personal attacks. So the first question is, where do you see those political action groups going? Is this just a new dynamic run wild, or do you anticipate that there will be some restrictions on, their future activities? And then the second question is about campaign finance reform. It's, the big mega bucks that are funding these nasty campaign comments. So what are your thoughts about the campaign finance reform?
Sure. On the first question, where are things going with these independent groups? Just to give you a quick explanation of what brought us to this point. So a couple things coincided this election. One was, I think, particularly on the Republican side, kind of a weak RNC. The Republican National Committee was not a force, didn't have as much money, wasn't directing the message. The talking points, I think, were coming from Karl Rove in Texas, maybe more so than the RNC headquarters. So that, I think, allowed a lot of Republican leaders like Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie to decide, we're just going to kind of run our own shadow operation, and so they started American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS. So that was one factor. The other factor was the Supreme Court decision in 2 Supreme Court cases, the most important of which is Citizens United, where it opened the door to corporate spending that hadn't previously been possible. But also, a lot of these groups are actually operating not under the Citizens United decision, but under just existing tax law, and they're really pushing the boundaries, I think, of the IRS tax laws, more on the Republican side, but some on the Democratic side. Where do I think that's going to go? I don't see anything putting the brakes on that. One of the things that was interesting, particularly with American Crossroads, was Crossroads GPS operating as a 501c4, I think, isn't required to reveal its donors. So they were spending, tens of millions of dollars, and we don't know whether those tens of millions of dollars came from one person or 50 people or 5,000 people. Before the election, the Democrats tried to pass the Disclose Act that would require disclosure for those sorts of expenditures, and it was blocked by the Republicans. With the Republicans now gaining strength in Congress, I can't imagine those dynamics are going to change. So I would think in 2012 we're just going to see more of that. In terms of campaign finance reform, I think the Republicans have often been supportive of more disclosure, quicker disclosure, reveal all your money, but not been in favor of the kinds of restrictions that McCain-Feingold required. I can't imagine there's going to be any significant campaign finance legislation in the next 2 years. So I think we're going to see what we saw this time in 2012. Will it be worse? One of my questions I got a lot was, is this the most negative campaign you've ever seen? We don't really have and I'm a data guy. I can't, we can't really say, well, we gave more pants on fires for personal attacks, but, I look at it two ways. I mean, one, great for my business. So, but maybe not great for democracy. So, thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to Bill Adair, Washington Bureau Chief for the St. Petersburg Times and editor of PolitiFact. Thank you, Mr. Adair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.